Hello, thank you so much for watching my presentation. Today I will be presenting on Cuyahoga Community College, and my name is Nikki Patton. For this project, I had the opportunity to speak with Claire Rom. Claire Rom is the Assistant Dean for Counseling for the Western Campus of Cuyahoga Community College. She's been at Tri-C for 5 months, maybe 5.5 at this point, but she's worked in higher ed for many decades. She's worked in roles like residence life, campus auxiliary services, and she's even been an interim vice president. She has experience at really small schools as well as larger state schools, and now she's kind of rounding out her experience by working at a community college. She is also currently working on her dissertation for her doctoral degree on the topic of organizational changes that institutions have made because of COVID. Since she recently joined the college, she was able to speak a bit to the experience of a new employee and kind of how they get cultured into the institution. Prior to her arrival, the counseling office didn't have a direct supervisor for multiple years, and the employees were reporting to the dean of students instead. Obviously, her arrival and the shift in authority was a big change for the counselors. While her official title is Assistant Dean for Counseling, she believes that her role actually is more similar to that of a department head. She does recognize, however, that most department heads are not just 2 levels away from the president, which she is, and this obviously puts her in a unique higher up position in the institution. So Cuyahoga Community College is Ohio's oldest and largest community college. It serves the Cleveland area through 4 campuses, as well as online programs, and they have over 200 programs. Tri-C is organized divisionally. So this means that the separate campuses operate fairly independently of each other, which is consistent with S&D's explanation of a divisional organization. While there is a president for the college as a whole, each of the 4 main campuses also has their own president, and they each have their own departments and staff for each campus. There are a lot of other state schools in Ohio that provide similar services to Tri-C, and being located in the urban area of Cleveland has slowed its recovery from the pandemic in comparison to its competitors, at least. However, Tri-C is seen by its local community as providing access and opportunity due to their particularly low tuition costs. Tri-C also receives some funding from local property taxes, which is unique, and this leads to a very close relationship between the school and its environment. This means that the institution is a pretty open system, as described by S&D, since the boundaries between the school and its environment are not overly strong, allowing for more interaction between the two. Information at Tri-C is typically shared in one of 2 ways, and this is largely tied to its organizational design. Communications that apply to everybody across all campuses come from the central office of the institution and are usually sent from the provost. Some examples of what would come through this way would be enrollment dates, payment dates, and timesheet information. More campus-specific information is shared by the campus president. The information that Ms. Rom receives at the Western campus is often different, however, from what her counterparts receive at the other Tri-C campuses. As such, she and her counterparts at the other campuses meet regularly to talk about what information they are receiving, what the differences are, and if there's ways that they can correct those differences, with the goal to possibly facilitate greater collaboration between the campuses in the future. Tri-C's mission is to provide high-quality, accessible, and affordable educational opportunities and services, including university transfer, technical, and lifelong learning programs that promote individual development and improve the overall quality of life in a multicultural community. Since Tri-C is funded in part by the local property tax, the mission statement is used as an external document to explain to the local community why Tri-C should matter to them. Internally, the mission statement is used among staff, faculty, students to remind everybody what they're doing as a school. And the new college-wide president, who began at Tri-C only in July, uses the mission statement to determine kind of where the institution fits in its environment. So at Tri-C, decisions tend to be made based on prior practice. The institution largely follows the Ohio Revised Code, which has pretty strict rules about employment, payment, student status, and many other things. During the pandemic, however, the president of Tri-C had to make some in-the-moment decisions that didn't have a clear precedent, such as cutting pay by 20% and having to dismiss some of the part-time staff. When Ms. Ram is faced with making a decision and she'll ask her coworkers for guidance sometimes, they typically share how the problem has been handled in the past. So this style of decision-making, of kind of going back on what's been done in the past, can lead to a number of learning traps, which would prevent the institution from growing. Specifically, they might fall into the competency trap, the familiarity trap, or the maturity trap. A competency trap happens when organizations invest in improving a tried and true process, according to Best MD. When an organization uses solutions that are well known in a particular field or industry, they fall into a familiarity trap. And a maturity trap occurs when the organization relies on solutions that have worked for the organization in the past, again, from Best MD. One way that the institution does appear to be attempting to combat these traps, however, is visible in the Western Campus president's actions. At the beginning of her employment at the institution, the Western Campus president established a leadership team to serve as an advisory council to her. This team is mostly made up of staff and faculty who serve as deans, and the team serves to exchange information and help inform the president's decisions. By bringing together multiple different perspectives, the president can kind of embrace different ideas and encourage greater organizational learning. So the issue that Ms. Ram identified during our interview is the tension between the different roles that her staff hold. So her team is made up of both part-time and full-time counselors, both of whose primary role is supposed to be providing academic advising. However, as you can see, there are a lot of other things pulling at their time. Full-time counselors, for example, are also expected to teach general studies courses at the college, as well as teach college success courses at local high schools, and they're highly encouraged to become involved in faculty governance since they do teach. These opportunities definitely enrich their jobs and give them a diverse amount of things to work on, but they do limit the amount of time that the counselors can spend meeting with students. So Ms. Ram's office combats this by hiring a lot of part-time counselors. The part-time counselors are not as well compensated, they aren't eligible for benefits, so they are cheaper for the institution to employ. But Ms. Ram wants to find out how she can increase the capacity of her team she has at the moment to meet with students without necessarily growing her team. She suggested that this might possibly involve reevaluating roles or pacing the amount of time that the counselors spend outside of their primary role expectations of being counselors. However, Ms. Ram is unsure at which level of the organization that decision should be made, whether that's something she can do or whether she would need to bring that up. To make things more complicated, there is also an expectation that she mostly leave the full-time counselors alone because they are seen as experts. So the main problem here seems to be role conflict and role ambiguity as described by Bess and Dee. Ms. Ram herself seems to be experiencing some inter-sender conflict since she's expected to provide leadership and direction for her team, but is also expected to respect the experience of her full-time staff by not interfering in their work. So Bess and Dee describe inter-sender conflict as the extent to which role expectations set by at least two role senders seem to demand behavior that is contradictory, mutually exclusive, or incompatible. Ms. Ram also appears to be experiencing objective role ambiguity, which is described as uncertainty concerning expected role performance by Bess and Dee. So this is visible in her uncertainty and the uncertainty in general on how to suggest or enact changes in her office to improve the state of it. The counselors that Ms. Ram supervises are also clearly experiencing role conflict. The full-time staff are facing inter-role conflict due to the number of tasks they're given. Inter-role conflict is described by Bess and Dee as the extent to which the various role expectations communicated to a role incumbent appear to exceed the available time and resources to meet the role expectations. The full-time counselors are being asked to not only provide academic counseling services to a caseload of students, but are also being asked to teach a number of classes, among other things. The part-time staff are also likely experiencing inter-role conflict for a different reason. So these employees are expected to carry the whole team's academic advising load by filling in the necessary gaps that are left by the full-time staff, which puts a lot on their plates. All counselors who have been at Tri-C longer than Ms. Ram are probably also experiencing some inter-sender conflict, as it's possible that the dean of students who they reported to previously had different expectations for them than Ms. Ram does now. So as Ms. Ram seeks to make some changes by clarifying the roles and increasing her involvement in her full-time staff, it'll be important for her to consider the interaction between trust and power. Bess and Dee talk about how employees who have more trust in their supervisors are more likely to believe that the authority's actions are beneficial for them and therefore to go along with them. So since Ms. Ram is relatively new to the institution, she might benefit from spending a little bit more time growing that trust in her terms of her employees before instituting any large changes. In addition, she might want to tap into some referent power or expert power. So referent power induces followers who wish to model their actions on the power holder and behave in ways that are consistent with the power holder's desires. Expert power invokes action out of recognition of the power holder's special skills and competencies. The reason that she should consider channeling these two is because both types of power will likely yield commitment from her staff when she makes decisions and will most likely not lead to follower resistance. In terms of her own role ambiguity and intersender conflict, Ms. Ram should start by looking at leadership theory. But she can start by determining which leadership style she tends to default to based on Hersey and Blanchard's work as visible in the chart on the screen. There's the telling style, the selling style, the participating style, and the delegating style. So she can figure out kind of where she falls by considering how important relationships are to her in comparison to task completion. She'll then be able to consider what changes she might need to make to her leadership style to best match the current situation in her office. So Ms. Ram should evaluate the situations when each of the leadership styles works best. And this is determined by the maturity of the group of followers, which here is for counselors. Since her counselors are largely considered experts in their field, it's likely that the best style for leading them would be either the participating style or the delegating style. Another option here would be to consider the phases of organizational development as described by Bess and Dee. So she and her staff are likely in one of the first two stages. The first stage is taking hold, which lasts for the first half a year of a new leadership's appointment. And here the leader should begin by really just taking a bigger role. Oh, sorry, nope, I'm wrong. Here the leader should spend time becoming accustomed to the culture of the institutions. They should start just by kind of observing. And the second stage is immersion, during which the new leader should begin to take a bigger role in involvement at the institution. So Ms. Ram can kind of evaluate which of those two stages she thinks they might be in and then change her actions based on those descriptions. Once it is time to make some changes, Ms. Ram could focus on clarifying the roles of the counselors. She'll need to balance too much role clarity with role ambiguity, since an excess of clarity can be intrusive and can be a little bit overbearing. And having some ambiguity also allows the counselors to be more innovative in solving problems, according to Bess and Dee. So Ms. Ram will need to first tackle the role conflict that the counselors are facing. And the main way to do this when the conflict is inter-role conflict would be to blend currently competing roles. So here for the counselors, that would mean blending the roles of teacher and counselor. So one way that she could do this would be to assign students to counselors based on the classes they teach. So for example, if all full-time counselors teach an introductory seminar for the freshman class, the students in each counselor's class could also be students assigned to their advisory caseload. This would allow the counselors to be engaging with their students both in the classes and outside of the classes, and could possibly even allow them to bring in some topics into the class to discuss as a group that they might normally have to discuss in one-on-one counseling sessions, which would save them time. Like all institutions right now, Cuyahoga Community College has gone through a lot of changes in the past couple of years. And these changes do seem to have played a part in the role conflict and ambiguity that Ms. Ram and her staff are experiencing. By considering both leadership theory and thoughtfully initiating changes to decrease the conflict and the ambiguity, Ms. Ram will be able to improve her staff's morale and efficiency, which will lead to better outcomes for the students. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Please view my sources here.